The world of Runeterra is a tapestry of rival lands and restless histories. In the frozen Freljord, clans contend beneath skies of endless winter, watched over by old gods and greater hungers. To the west, Demacia rises in marble and steel, clinging to ideals of honor, while Noxus spreads its dominion with ruthless ambition, bending every culture it conquers. Across the sea, Ionia seeks harmony between spirit and flesh, yet still there are scars from wars that broke its balance. In the deep south, Shurima's golden empire lies buried beneath its own sands, its god kings whispered of in myth, yet stirring once again. Between these great powers stand others no less vital: Piltover, city of progress, and Zaan, its shadowed twin below, bound together by invention and unrest. Billwater thrives on blood and coin, where sea beasts and pirates rule the tides. The Shadow Isles, once a proud kingdom, now linger in ruin land, and soul alike consumed by a cursed mist. And beneath it all, older still, lurks the void, a hunger from beyond the stars, gnawing ever at the edges of creation. Aatrox, the Darkened Blade. Whether mistaken for a demon or god, many tales have been told of the Darkened Blade, but few know his real name or the story of his fall. In ancient times, long before desert sands swallowed the empire, a mighty champion of Shurima was brought before the sun disk to become the avatar for a now forgotten celestial ideal. Remade as one of the Ascended, his wings were the golden light of dawn, and his armor sparkled like a constellation of hope from beyond the great veil. Aatrox was his name. He was at the vanguard of every noble conflict. So true and just was his conduct that other god warriors would always gather at his side, and 10,000 mortals of Shurima marched behind him. When Setaka, the Ascended Warrior Queen, called for his help against the rebellion of Icathia, Aatrox answered without hesitation. But no one predicted the extent of the horrors that the rebels would unleash. The void quickly overwhelmed its Icathian masters and began the grinding annihilation of all life it encountered. After many years of desperate battle, Aatrox and his brethren finally halted the void's perverse advance and seared the largest rifts shut. But the surviving Ascended, the self-described Sunborn, had been forever changed by what they had encountered. Though Shurima had triumphed, they all had lost something in their victory, even noble Aatrox. And in time, Shurima fell, as all empires must. Without any monarch to defend, or the existential threat of the void to test them, Aatrox and the Sunborn began to clash with one another, and eventually this became a war for the ruins of their world. Mortals fleeing the conflict came to know them instead by a new and scornful name, the Darken. Fearing that these fallen Ascended were as dangerous to Runeterra's survival as the Void incursions had been, the Targonians intervened. It is said that the aspect of Twilight gave mortals the knowledge to trap the Darken, and the newly reborn aspect of war united many in fighting back against them. Never fearing any foe, Aatrox and his armies were ready, and he realized only too late that they had been deceived. A force greater than 1,000 dead suns pulled him inside the sword he had carried into battle countless times, and forever bound his immortal essence to it. The weapon was a prison, sealing his consciousness in suffocating eternal darkness, robbing him even of the ability to die. For centuries, he strained against this hellish confinement, until some nameless mortal was foolish enough to try and wield the blade once more. Aatrox seized upon this opportunity, forcing his will and an imitation of his original form onto his bearer, though the process quickly drained all life from the new body. In the years that followed, Aatrox groomed many more hosts, men and women of exceptional vitality or fortitude. Though his grasp of such magics had been limited in life, he learned to take control of a mortal in the span of single breath, and in battle he discovered he could feast on his victims to build himself ever larger and stronger. Aatrox traveled the land, searching desperately, endlessly, for a way return to his previous Ascended form, but the riddle of the blade proved unsolvable. and in time he realized he would never be free of it. The one, Anat Endinavit, one Arudal assistant, require. The heavenly powers that Aatrox had once embodied had been wiped from the world, and all memory. Raging against this injustice, he arrived at a solution that could only be born of a prisoner's desperation. If he could not destroy the blade or free himself, then he would embrace oblivion instead. Now, Aatrox marches toward this merciless goal, bringing war and death wherever he goes. He clings to a blind hope. If he can drive all of creation into a final, apocalyptic battle, where everything else is destroyed, then maybe he and the blade will also cease to exist. Alistar, the Minotaur. Many civilizations have resisted Noxus, but none as long as the clans of the Great Barrier Mountains. Though these fierce Minotaurs had protected the overland trade routes to the ancient city of Zone for centuries, they preferred to avoid Valoran's wider conflicts. The noble warrior Alistar was respected among all the clans. Out on the mountain peaks, his roar could scatter even the bravest trespassers, leaving only the foolhardy to face him in combat. Even so, in the moot halls, he would always urge his kin to forge greater bonds with other mortal races. Many saw Minotaurs as little more than beasts, which soured any interaction and kept them firmly as outsiders. Then Noxus came, promising something better. Their emissary, the matriarch of House Twain, proclaimed that the Empire was poised to take Basilich, a coastal city to the east. However, she pledged that they would not do this without the support of the great clans of the mountains, and called for parley on neutral ground. Many of the Minotaurs were eager to accept her offer. This was a way to gain the power and recognition they sought, by joining with Noxus. But Alistar remained skeptical. He had encountered many Noxian scouts in recent years, and knew them to be a duplicitous and cunning people. For this reason, his clan sent him to meet Twain, along with 50 of their mightiest warriors, to reject any alliance. The other clans could do as they wished, but Alistar would not accept the rule of some distant Grand General. Under the banners of truce, he and his kin were betrayed. Larger clans had already pledged themselves to Noxus, and their representatives turned against him as soon as he made his position known. The battle was swift and bloody, and Alistar himself crushed Lady Twain's skull with his bare hands, but soon enough, he and his surviving warriors found themselves bound in chains, headed for the distant Noxian capital, accused of inciting rebellion. These unfortunate Minotaurs found themselves cast into the reckoning arenas of the capital as part of a grim gladiatorial festival known as the Fleshing. Alistar was appalled by the chanting of the bloodthirsty spectators. He implored his clanfolk not to fight back, not to give these Noxians the monstrous display they so craved. When the festival ended 21 days later, Alistar was the only member of his tribe left, pelted with pebbles and rotten fruit from the crowd, dragged out to face Reckoner after Reckoner. He was driven to fight like a beast, and think like one. He killed and killed until even his memories of home became stained with blood. Alistar had fallen far by the time he met Aelia, a servant girl in the arenas. At first, he bellowed and charged the bars of his cage, expecting her to fear or goad him like the others, but Aelia did neither. She returned every day and spoke to him with gentle respect, until eventually Alistar answered in kind. Aelia's homeland had also been claimed by Noxus, and seeing his suffering had convinced her they should leave this hateful city together. She whispered her plans through the bars, and for the first time in years, Alistar found he could think of home without dwelling on the way it had been taken from him. One night, Aelia brought Alistar the key to his cell. She had sacrificed much to arrange this escape, and he swore he would repay her tenfold. They hurried to the river, where a cargo barge awaited them. However, as they boarded, Noxian agents burst from the shadows. Alistar hurled himself into battle, his vision tunneled with rage, and although Aelia called out to him again and again, he did not hear. By the time Alistar had slain their attackers, the boat was gone, and Aurelion with it, so he fled south on foot instead. He searched everywhere for the servant girl, but found nothing. Had she been captured? Killed? It seemed there were no clues left to find. Weeks later, a political coup shook the Empire to its dark foundations, and the Arena Minotaur's escape was quite forgotten. Well, Alistar now travels alone, as quietly and anonymously as he can, encouraging resistance in Noxian-held territories and fighting on behalf of the downtrodden and the abused. Only when he has cleared the shame from his heart, repaying every cruelty and every kindness, will Alistar return to the mountains and leave his rage behind. And in every city he passes through, he asks after Aurelion. Annie, the Dark Child. Born Darkwill's last years on the throne were a time of great uncertainty for Noxus, and many with an aptitude for magic left the capital for the relative peace of more distant provinces. Gregory the Grey and his wife, a witch by the name of Evelynn, preferred to demonstrate their Noxian strength by taming the borderlands, rather than partaking in the political intrigue of the noble houses. The young couple claimed a piece of land beyond the Iron Spike Mountains to the north, finishing their small home just before winter and the arrival of their first child. During their journey, other colonists' tales of the great shadow bears that once roamed the territory had captivated Evelynn. Now heavily pregnant, she passed the time sitting near the fireplace, creating a toy version of the protective creatures. Just as she finished sewing the last button eye on the stuffed bear, the quickening of labor overcame her. Gregory remarked later that his daughter was eager to play with her new toy, for there, on an ember-warmed hearth, Evelynn brought Annie into the world. When Annie was still a toddler, she and her father took ill. As night fell, Annie began to burn with fever, and soon she was so hot she could no longer be held in her mother's arms. Evelynn grew desperate, deciding at last to fetch icy water from the nearby river. The next morning, Gregory awoke, weak and groggy from his sickness. In the crib, and now healthy Annie played with her stuffed bear Tibbers, but Evelynn was gone. Naively, Annie believed her mother would one day return. Gregory would often find the girl sitting in her mother's rocking chair near the hearth, hugging Tibbers and staring into a crackling fire, where he was sure there had been nothing but cold ashes. He chalked up these slips of the mind to the burden of parenting a child alone. Years passed, bringing more colonists to the region, and in time, Gregory met Liana, a woman seeking a new life outside the capital with her own young daughter, Gazy. Annie was eager for a playmate, but spoiled by the indulgences of being an only child, so acclimation to her new stepfamily was difficult. Whenever Annie's fiery temper erupted, it left Liana uneasy and quick to take her own daughter's side. It fell to Gregory to keep an uneasy peace between the three. Unused to the dangers of the untamed borderlands, Daisy's playing ended in catastrophe for the family. Liana, of course, blamed Annie for the loss of her daughter, focusing her rage and grief on her stepdaughter's most prized possession, Tibbers. Annie was horrified as the last physical memory of her mother was threatened. The girl's terror grew to an unbridled rage, releasing her latent and powerful pyromancy, and the stuffed bear was brought to life in a maelstrom of protective fire. When the flames died down and the swirl of ash settled, Annie was left orphaned and alone. Believing most city adults to be like her stepmother, Annie has kept to the wilder parts of her frontier homeland. On occasion, she will use her disarmingly adorable exterior to be taken in by some pioneer family long enough to be offered new clothes and a hot meal. However, fire and death awaits anyone foolish enough to try parting Annie from the stuffed bear at her side. Kept safe by Tibbers, she wanders the dark forests of Noxus, oblivious to danger and the dangers posed to others by her own unchecked power, hoping, one day, to find someone like her to play with. Aurelion Sol, the Star Forger. The appearance of a comet in the night sky is often said to portend upheaval and unrest. Under the auspices of such fiery harbingers, new empires rise, old cultures fall, and even the stars themselves may vanish from the heavens. The truth is, perhaps, more unsettling. The almighty being, known as Aurelion Sol, was already ancient before the rise of the mortal races of Runeterra. Born in the first breath of creation, he and those like him roamed the vast nothingness of a pristine celestial realm, seeking to fill this canvas of incalculable breadth with marvels whose twinkling spectra would bring fulfillment and delight to all who witnessed them. But then, bathed in the light of a fairly unremarkable sun he had crafted eons earlier, he discovered something. A world, new realms. He did not know who had created this world, or why, only that it had not been him. The aspects, who seemed unusually invested in it, implored him to come closer. There was life here, and magic, and fledgling civilizations that cried out for guidance from beings greater than themselves. Flattered by this new audience to his supreme majesty, Aurelion Sol descended to bask in their adulation in the form of a vast and terrible dragon from the stars. The tiny inhabitants of the insignificant land of Tahm named him for the golden light of the sun he had gifted them, and the aspects commanded them to bring forth a suitable offering in return. The mortals climbed to the peak of their tallest mountain and presented him with a splendorous crown, crafted with careful and cunning magic and etched with the inscrutable patterns of the celestial realm. From the moment it touched Aurelion Sol's brow, he knew this was no gift at all. The accursed thing clamped in place with unimaginable force, enough that even he could not remove it, and he could feel his knowledge of the sun and its creation being stolen and scrutinized by intelligences vastly inferior to his own. Worse still, the power of the crown hurled him back into the heavens and prevented him from getting any closer to that world again. Instead, he was forced to watch as the duplicitous aspects of Targon set the mortals to work in the construction of a great, gleaming disk. With this, they channeled his celestial power to raise up immortal god warriors for some unknown conflict that was apparently still to come. Outraged, Aurelion Sol could see other stars fading across the firmament for lack of care and maintenance, and he strained to break free of the crown's control. It was he who had birthed their light into the universe. Why must he be shackled now by the aspects and their lowly pawns? He roared with glee when the sun disk failed, only to see a second, more powerful one take its place. Eventually, resigned to his fate, he saw the god warriors cast down their rivals, then chittering creatures of pure darkness, and eventually each other. Then, in little more than the blink of a star dragon's eye, the world was ravaged by a succession of sorcerous catastrophes, and Aurelion Sol finally knew that Targon and the hated aspects were all but defenseless. As he cautiously circled back, he realized the magic that bound him was weakening. Flecks of gold began to fall from his crown, each one blazing across the skies like a comet. Driven by the tantalizing possibilities of freedom and revenge, Aurelion Sol now regards Runeterra with simmering, eternal fury. Sure will the
Bard, the wandering caretaker.
It is said that most inhabitants of the celestial realm see their home as a wondrous and vivid tapestry. However, for one prodigious entity, the intangible and everlasting beauty of this dimension is not seen, but heard. For Bard, a troubadour as enigmatic as he is eternal, the wondrous firmament is a symphony of mystic, ambrosial music. In the beginning, Bard had drifted without purpose or perspective through a silent cosmos, but with a deep sense of anticipation that something miraculous would eventually come to fill it. Fate did not disappoint, and with the forging of the first stars, the silence was broken, and the first rapturous notes of creation rang in Bard's ear. He traveled the swirling harmonies between the stars, along with the tiniest wisps of residual inspiration and thought left over from their birth. These semitonal, incomplete motes of energy, or meeps, were drawn to him whenever he added his own voice to the cosmic opus, forever ringing in one perfect accord. This was not his masterpiece, yet he gloried in it all the same. But after a measureless interval, a dissonance began to creep in. It was so small at first, Bard might have missed it, but the ever-doting meeps drew his attention to a failed dynamic shift here, an unexpected syncopation there, and even the growing absence of sound where, before, sound had been. Bard scoured the celestial realm for clues, until he discovered the source. It was the most curious of things, a world with a song all of its own. Driven by unknown magic, the music produced by Runeterra was as primitive, unevolved, and chaotic as the mortal beings that lived there, and yet it had an inherent beauty, like the rolling thunder of a storm or the melodious knocking of wooden chimes in the wind that precedes it. Bard would have merely appreciated it for what it was, but unfortunately, this particular song had gone far beyond a mere counterpoint to the celestial whole and was becoming destructive. Something had to be done. Touching down in the first lands of Ionia, Bard and his attended meeps crossed into the material realm. All at once, his ears became like eyes, and he fashioned himself a simple body from the trinkets and fabrics of a traveling sham player's wagon, including a beguiling mask circular, with 3 holes in the face. He walked the world for an age, confusing and delighting those he encountered along the way, and found the state of things far more complex than he had first imagined. Many objects of wild and unpredictable power seemed to have made their way erroneously into Runeterra, and were disrupting the natural cosmic order of things. Casting his gaze back to the heavens, Bard deduced that some other power within the celestial realm was at work here, though to what end, he could not guess. Regardless, he is taken to the role of caretaker, retrieving anything out of place and returning it to where it can do no further harm. Though this may be only the first step in bringing the universe back in tune, it may also be the only way this world can be saved from what lies beyond it. And Bard is not blind to the future. He can see a great conflict approaching, one fought not in any single realm, but in all, and awaits the time when he must finally pick a side, and the burning vengeance. The son of a Freljordian healer, Kagan Roddy was born an outsider. The little magic and herbcraft his mother possessed allowed them both to survive on the fringes of a small coastal community named Riggan's Reach. Friends were few and far between. Even as a young boy, he knew his father was an enemy reaver, and that he, and Kagan by extension, was the reason his mother was shunned. The villagers called him the Reader Bastard. Kagan allowed his loneliness and resentment to smolder, often turning violent. After enduring years of seemingly endless winter, his mother's frail body finally gave in. As Kagan spread her funeral ashes, he thought of the people she had spent her life healing. None had come to pay their respects. He knew they wished him to disappear into the cold air as well. He would oblige them, but not before he took his revenge. He burned down the village and fled into the night, leaving himself with scars that would never heal. Keegan wandered the frozen tundra of the Freljord. He told himself that he was searching for his father, but he knew deep down he was looking for a friend, or, at the very least, a kind face. Finding neither, he holed himself up in a cave and waited to die. It was not death that came to him, but another outsider. The mysterious mage named Ryze saw potential in this half-frozen young man and took him on as an apprentice. Teacher and student struggled, as Kagan's nascent, wild magic frustrated them both, and Ryze's requests for patience and humility often fell on deaf ears. After tracking down one such fragment, Kagan faced the same desperate temptation that had driven so many before him to madness. The runes were the source of all magic in the world, and, against his master's warnings, he chose to seize that power for himself. Ryze was forced to watch in failure as his apprentice was burned away by the raw magic, Keegan's soul utterly consumed. The creature that was born in that moment was no longer the bitter young man Ryze had rescued from the snows, nor the Freljordian mage he had come to know as his friend. Rather, This vengeful being of fire and fury that now walked the mortal realm would eventually become known as Brand. Cursing his former master and every other living thing that would ever come between him and the runes, Brand lashed out with magical flames, and Ryze barely escaped with his life. Over the centuries since that day, Brand has lived an anarchic, wildfire existence, taking and never giving anything back to the world. At times, he blazes across the heavens like a comet. At others, he sinks into the cold earth and slumbers, waiting for the unmistakable scent of magic that will lead him to another world rune. And should he find one, there are precious few in Runeterra with the power to stop him. Evelynn, Agony's Embrace. Within the dark seams of Runeterra, the demon Evelynn searches for her next victim. She lures in prey with the voluptuous facade of a human female, but once a person succumbs to her charms, Evelynn's true form is unleashed. She then subjects her victim to unspeakable torment, gratifying herself with their pain. To the demon, these liaisons are innocent flings. To the rest of Runeterra, they are ghoulish tales of lust gone awry, and horrific reminders of the cost of wanton desire. Evelynn was not always a skilled huntress. She began eons ago as something primordial, shapeless, and barely sentient. This nascent wisp of shadow existed, numb and unroused by any stimulation, for centuries. It might have remained so, had the world not been upended by conflict. The Rune Wars, as they would come to be known, brought an era of mass suffering the world had never known. As people across Runeterra began to experience a vast array of pain, anguish, and loss, the shadow stirred. The nothingness it had known for so long had been replaced by the manic vibrations of an agonized world. The creature quivered with excitement. As the Rune Wars escalated, the world's torment grew so intense that the shadow felt as if it might burst. It drank in all of Runeterra's pain, which it experienced as boundless pleasure. The sensation nourished the creature, and over time, it transformed into something more. It became a demon, a ravenous spiritual parasite that fed on the basest of human emotions. When the wars finally ended, the world's suffering waned, and the demon found itself growing desperate. The only pleasure it had ever known was born of other creatures' misery. Without their pain, it felt nothing, just as it had in its earliest days. If the world would not provide the suffering the demon needed to thrive, it would have to make its own. It needed to inflict pain on other beings so that it could experience that elation again. At first, catching prey was a challenge for the demon. It could move undetected in its shadow form, but to touch a human, the creature needed to manifest as something tangible. It made several attempts to fashion a physical body from its shadow flesh, but each result was more monstrous than the last, scaring off her prey. The demon realized it needed a shape that was pleasing to humans, one that would not only lure them right into its claws, but would offer them ecstasy born of their own desires, so that their pain would be that much sweeter. From the shadows, it began to study those it sought to prey upon. It tailored its flesh to their liking, learned to say what they wanted to hear, and to walk in a manner they found alluring. In a matter of weeks, the demon had perfected her physique, leading dozens of enamored victims to be tortured to death at her hands. Though she relishes the exquisite pain of each of her victims, she always finds herself wanting more. Each human's desires are so small, and they always expire too soon. Their pain, too fleeting to give her anything more than tiny morsels of pleasure, is just enough to tide her over to the next feeding. She yearns for the day she can plunge the world into utter chaos, and she can return to an existence of pure, rapturous ecstasy. Fiddlesticks. The ancient fear. Long, long ago, in a tower by the edge of the sea, a foolish young mage summoned something into the world that he was not prepared to control. What stepped before the boy was something older than recorded history. Something darker than a yawning, starless night. Something the world had desperately tried to forget. And in an instant, The mage, the creature, and the tower itself were lost to all of time. At least, that's what the stories say. In the Freljord, children frighten each other around the fire with tales of a monster that raises itself from untended graves in the ice. Its body a shambling mass of helmets, bucklers, furs, and wood. In Billwater, drunken sailors trade accounts of something standing alone on a tiny, distant atoll from which no one has ever returned. And the first interview, Drunken Sailors, an old Targonian legend, speaks of how a child of twilight stole the only joy from a ragged, whispering whore, while veteran Noxian soldiers prefer the fable of a lonely farmhand who is blamed for a poor harvest and fed to the crows, later returning to the world as a demon. Demon Demacia, Ixtal, Piltover, Ionia, Shermia. In every corner of Runeterra, these myths persist, reshaped, respun, and passed down by countless generations of storytellers. Stories of a thing that looks almost human and stalks places thick with fear. But these are simply fables to frighten young children. No one would ever be afraid of a silly old monster called Fiddlesticks. Until now. Something has awoken in the Dalmatian hinterlands, drawn by the climate of rising fear and paranoia. Rural protectorates, separated from the capital by hundreds of miles of farmland, are emptying in mere days. Travelers vanish from the old footpaths. Guard patrols fail to report back from the edges of the kingdom. And wild-eyed survivors clawed their faces from the safety of roadside taverns, wailing of crows that aren't crows, sounds that aren't sounds, and a lopsided horror in the shape of a scarecrow that croaks in the stolen voices of the dead. Most blame rogue mages. Such accusations are common in these days of rebellion. Yet the truth is far worse. Something has returned, just as it had in the fictitious tale of the young mage in his seaside tower. An evil gone from the world for numberless centuries, long enough that the warnings of a nascent humanity passed into rumor, then myth, then legend, until all that remained were simple fables. An entity so utterly alien that it defies almost all contemporary knowledge of magic, so impossibly ancient that it has always been, so universally feared that even animals grow nervous when someone speaks its name. In the wake of this revival, another tale, nearly lost to memory, has seen a resurgence throughout the hinterlands. A legend of a great evil that has no form, no thoughts, and no understanding of the world it inhabits, instead building itself into the crude shape of those that fear it. The terror of all living things, given life in that first terrible scream of creation, a demon before demons were known. At least, that's what the stories say. But Fiddlesticks is real. Fizz, the title trickster. In ages past, the oceans of Runeterra were home to civilizations far older than those of the land. In the depths of what is now the Guardian Sea, a great city once stood. It was here that the Yordle Fizz made his home. He lived alongside the artisans and warriors of that proud, noble race. Even though he was not one of them, they treated him as an equal, and his playful nature and tall tales of adventures in the open sea made him welcome at any gathering. But the world was changing. The oceans were growing warmer, and other settlements had fallen silent, but the rulers of the great city could still not agree on how to deal with the threat. Fizz pledged to roam the seas in search of survivors, or anyone who knew what had happened. Then, one dark day, the Gigalodons came. These huge dragon sharks stunned their prey with fell shrieking, and the avenues of the great city were soon clouded red. Thousands died in a matter of hours, the immense bulk of their killers crushing towers and temples in a monstrous feeding frenzy. Scenting blood in the water, Fizz raced back, determined to join the fight and save the city. He was too late. There was nothing left of the city to save. When the debris finally settled, not a single living creature remained, nor any stone upon another, and the ravenous shoal had moved on. Alone in the cold depths, Fizz sank into mournful despair. As his yordle magic began to fade, he let himself be carried by the currents, drifting in a catatonic torpor, dreaming away the millennia. It was only chance that reawakened him. A handful of copper coins fell from above, scattered to the seabed in the wake of a huge, wooden fish that swam upon the surface. This was no Gigalodon, but Fizz was alarmed nonetheless. He knew little of the world overhead, but surely no fish could survive up there. He ventured up and peered into the salty air for the first time. There were people who lived outside of the water and sailed in wooden fish of all sizes. Fizz found the thought both frightening and exciting, but the curious gifts they cast into the water made it clear that they wanted to be his friends. In time, following their movements to and fro across the oceans, he came to the port city of Bellwater. To the inhabitants of that lawless place, this strange and slippery creature quickly became something of a legend, the tidal trickster, a spirit of the ocean itself. It is said that he can summon great beasts to do his bidding, hole a ship's hull with his stone trident, and breathe air or water as it suits him. Many a misbehaving child has been warned on a moonless night, "Go quickly to sleep, or the trickster will come and feed you to the fishes." The most seasoned fishermen know, just as the ocean may rise and fall, the tidal trickster is as likely to lead them into windless doldrums as to an easy catch that would fill their nets. Even so, Fizz does not take kindly to the greedy or selfish, and more than one haughty sea captain hoping to make a quick pile of silver has found that her mysterious guide has led her crew not to safety, but to shipwreck. Jax, Grandmaster at Arms. He told him of the Kohari, heroes who protected Icathia and its Mage King. The Mage King had resisted Shurima's conquest, but when he died in battle, his Kohari protectors followed him, committing ritual suicide. The Shuriman Emperor displayed the Kohari's decaying bodies for all to see, and the Mage King himself was impaled above the city gates, his bones left to molder. Syjax's father had witnessed this cruel act, and over time, he passed down to his son the burning resentment that was growing in every Icathian heart. Even so, Syjax committed himself to the study of arms, learning from Shurima's weapons masters as well as his own clan's elders. After many centuries of Shuriman rule, a massive earthquake struck the coastal province of Cybera. The destruction revealed something hidden deep beneath the earth, something dark and of great power, perhaps strong enough even to overcome Shurima's godlike, ascended warriors. Syjax was entrusted with protecting the Icathian mages who encountered this discovery, which the guards just barely contained with brazier staves that blazed with conjured elemental fire. Disturbed, he escorted the mages to the governing council so they could tell of what they'd learned. They called this power the Void. Immediately, the council recognized its potential, but Syjax saw the doom the Void portended. As a master of weaponry, he knew the danger of using a weapon they could neither fully understand nor safely harness. He regretted that he didn't kill the mages as they rode from Cybera. He would regret it even more in the days to come. Confident that the Void could defeat their Shuriman overlords, the council crowned a new Mage King. The Kohari were rebuilt, with Syjax among the first to join their ranks. They triumphed in early engagements, and Syjax even killed one of the vaunted Ascended in battle, watching with pride as its corpse was paraded around the liberated city of Bijek. When the Ascended host approached Icathia, Syjax and his brethren assembled on the front lines. As the two armies churned the earth beneath them into crimson loam, Icathia's mages and priests deemed the time had come to unleash the Void. Ruin swept over the land as Icathians, Shurimans, and even Ascended were unraveled from existence. The city's walls collapsed as the void swallowed thousands into cold, silent oblivion. In moments, Ikathia was lost. Syjax rode to the ruined crater where the void had been summoned, determined to fall upon his sword like the Kohari of old. He took up the stave and left behind the ruins of his homeland, tending to this last light of Ikathia and the hope it represented. Grieving and ashamed, Syjax Kael'Rink's Kohari Ikathian forsook his old name, and from that day was known only as Jax. He became a wanderer, traveling across the known world and to places beyond any map. As he bore the elemental fire, Jax's life extended beyond even the expectations of his long-lived people. Yet the farther he went from Ikathia, the lower the flame burned, until it threatened to gutter out once and for all. Jax understood with grim resolution that he couldn't run from his past. He had a duty to return and fight. The advance of the Void had been halted by the last surviving Ascended, but its singular threat endured. For centuries since, Jax has roamed, a vagabond warrior searching for those strong enough to rebuild the Kohari. Though he has fought countless times against beings of great skill, courage, and power, none have yet convinced him that they can march against the coming darkness. The fall of Ikathia has plagued Jax with doubt, but one thing remains certain. When the final battle comes, Jax will stand against the Void, even if he has to face it alone. Kindred, the Eternal Hunters. Separate but never parted, Kindred represents the twin essences of death. Lamb's Bow offers a swift release from the mortal realm for those who accept their fate. Wolf hunts down those who run from their end, delivering violent finality within his crushing jaws. Though interpretations of Kindred's nature vary across Runeterra, every mortal must choose the true face of their death. Kindred is the white embrace of nothingness and the gnashing of teeth in the dark. Shepherd and the butcher, poet and the primitive. They are one and both. When caught on the edge of life, louder than any trumpeting horn, it is the hammering pulse at one's throat that calls Kindred to their hunt. Stand and greet Lamb's silvered bow, and her arrows will lay you down swiftly. If you refuse her, Rolf will join you for his merry hunt, where every chase runs to its brutal end. For as long as its people have known death, Kindred has stalked Valoran. When the final moment comes, it is said a true Damatian will turn to Lamb, taking the arrow, while through the shadowed streets of Noxus, Wolf leads the hunt. In the snows of the Freljord, before going off to fight, some warbands kiss the wolf, vowing to honor his chase with the blood of their enemies. After each harrowing, the town of Biljotwar gathers to celebrate its survivors and honor those granted a true death by Lamb and Wolf. Denying Kindred is to deny the natural order of things. There are but a wretched few who have eluded these hunters. This perverse escape is no sanctuary, for it only holds a waking nightmare. Kindred waits for those locked in the undeath of the Shadow Isles, for they know all will eventually fall to Lamb's bow or Wolf's teeth. The earliest dated appearance of the Eternal Hunters is from a pair of ancient masks, carved by unknown hands into the gravesites of people long forgotten. But to this day, Lamb and Wolf remain together, and they are always kindred.
Lucian, the Purifier. From an early age, Lucian wanted nothing more than to be like his father, Urius, who was a member of the ancient order of the Sentinels of Light. While Lucian remained home in Demacia, Urius ranged far and wide, protecting the living from the wraiths of the Black Mist. Urius would regale Lucian with tales of his adventures, where courage and ingenuity carried the day. Lucian hung on every word, picturing himself saving the people of Runeterra at his father's side. But Urius did not want his son to follow in his footsteps, hoping to keep his family safe from the dangerous life he had chosen. Lucian waited for the day he would become Uraeus' apprentice, but it never came. Instead, Lucian stayed in Demacia, where he found himself increasingly at odds with the kingdom's culture. It especially rankled him that Demacia would exile peaceful mages to the hinterlands. Lucian found fulfillment in safeguarding the banished on their perilous journey. Where his countrymen saw only outlaws, reducing the world to good or evil, Lucian looked closer and saw people in need of help. After returning home from one such journey, Lucian found a stranger waiting at his door. She introduced herself as Senna, a sentinel of light. Cradling Uraeus' relic pistol in her hands, Senna explained that Lucian's father had died, falling in battle against the long-dead wraiths of the Black Mist. Senna had been Uraeus' apprentice, fighting at his side for years. Lucian reeled in shock. Not only was his father dead, but before him stood a woman who had lived the life he had wanted for so long. As Senna made to take her leave, Lucian stopped her at the door, insisting he join her. He knew what came next, the vigil for lost sentinels. Senna reluctantly allowed Lucian to accompany her. Along the way, the two traded stories of their time with Uraeus, Senna comforting Lucian with their plainspoken wisdom, and Lucian easing her pain with fond remembrances. They arrived at Uraeus' birthplace, far away from Demacian lands. There, they held the vigil for lost sentinels. As they prepared to depart, dark clouds rolled in over the coast, and wraiths manifested from the foulness, attacking them. Where Lucian was horrified, Senna drew her weapons with a grim familiarity. This was her curse. Since she was a child, tendrils of the Black Mist had stalked her wherever she went, unleashing its horror should she tarry anywhere for too long. As Senna fought one of the creatures, it clawed Uraeus' pistol from her grip. Lucian retrieved it, sensing his fate opening up before him. The blazing sorrow in his heart manifested in a bolt of light that blasted from the pistol, distracting the wraith so Senna could banish it. Senna fought off the remaining spirits before the pair left, the mist ever on her trail. Never before had one of the uninitiated fired a sentinel's relic weapon. For the first time, Lucian had shown Senna his potential to join the Order. Eventually, Senna entrusted Lucian with his father's pistol and instructed him in the tactics and doctrines of the Sentinels. He proved himself worthy of the lessons. A bond slowly formed between them. Lucian's warmth and charm, the perfect balance to Senna's discipline and unbreakable resolve. Lucian and Senna battled the myriad evils that ushered forth from the Black Mist, and their reliance upon each other blossomed into love. The closer Lucian grew to Senna, the more he witnessed the curse she bore. Each conflict hardened him, splitting the world apart into light and shadow, good and evil. Lucian's urge to heal Senna became a crusade he pursued with reckless zeal. Scoring a forgotten vault for a cure, the two sentinels were attacked by the monstrous wraith, Thresh. The ghoulish chain warden was a dangerous foe, and when Senna called to withdraw and regroup, Lucian refused to turn back. Throwing himself blindly into the attack, Lucian realized his mistake as Thresh gained the upper hand. Senna stepped into Thresh's path, imploring Lucian to run. As the dust settled, Senna lay dead before him, her soul claimed by Thresh's eldritch lantern. Senna's sacrifice was nearly Lucian's undoing. For years, he stalked Runeterra, a husk of the man he once was. His former warp replaced with anger and bitterness. Wielding both his pistol and Senna's, Lucian hunted Thresh in the hope of destroying the lantern and granting oblivion to his captive love. On the day that battle finally came, Lucian shattered the lantern, but instead of finding her eternal rest, Senna re-emerged. Lucian and Senna's love is a bond even death could not sever. As Lucian struggles to grasp Senna's altered form, he is forced to confront his own. Lucian now fights to return to his former self, while grappling with the reality that the dark forces he hates are all that keep Senna with him. While Senna has returned with knowledge of a new mission, Lucian remains obsessed with exacting vengeance from Thresh
as he is certain the Chain Warden's machinations have only begun. Nami,
The Tidecaller. A headstrong young Vastaya of the seas, Nami uses her mystical Tidecaller staff to reshape the tides and defend her fellow Mirai from danger. The first of her kind to leave the ocean and venture onto dry land, Nami faces the unthinkable with grit, determination, and daring mettle. In the seas to the west of Mount Targon dwells a tribe of Vastaya known as the Mirai. Long ago, these mermatic creatures discovered a rift in the depths. The rift bore a horrible, creeping darkness which sought to exterminate all forms of life. At the center of their village, the Mirai placed a glowing rock known as a moonstone, which is said to be infused with the celestial magic of the heavens. Its haunting, ethereal light protects the Mirai from the creatures that crawl from the abyss. Every 100 years or so, the moonstone's light begins to dim. At that moment, the tribe chooses their fiercest warrior and bestows upon them the title of Tidecaller. The Tidecaller must plunge into the icy darkness of the rift, survive the horrors within, and retrieve an abyssal pearl. If successful, the Tidecaller rises to shore, where a luminous wanderer from Targon's peak awaits with a moonstone to trade for the pearl. It is an arduous ritual that holds the fate of many in its elusive hands, but the exchange has kept the creatures of the dark contained. In the past, the Mirai had sent troops of their most elite warriors to collect the pearl, but they learned the more forces they sent into the rift, the stronger the monsters became, as if it fed on their energy. While Vervain Sin, from an L with an L and not Quill, assistant, Nami had always wanted to be the Tidecaller, but she was impulsive and young. A fierce fighter, she was known amongst the Mirai for her stubborn determination, which often got her in trouble. In Nami's adolescence, the moonstone once again dimmed for the first time in a century. Nami attempted the trial of the Tidecaller. Due to her impulsiveness, however, the elders chose Rasho, a prudent warrior known for his level head in battle, as their Tidecaller. Rasho dove into the depths of the abyss. A week passed, then another. An entire month the Mirai waited for their Tidecaller's return, but there was no sign of Rasho. No Tidecaller had ever failed to return. The elders waited and argued while the moonstone grew faint, but Nami knew someone had to take up the mantle of Tidecaller soon, or all would be lost. It might as well be her. Nami grabbed her mother's bath staff and plunged into the abyss. After several days, she returned with the pearl, the fallen Tidecaller's staff, and a look of quiet horror in her eyes. Though furious at her impertinence, the village elders nonetheless admired Nani's bravery and officially designated her Tidecaller. Nami ascended to the surface and rode the tide to shore to meet the landwalker. The stonebearer, however, was nowhere to be found. Instead, an elderly woman waited on the beach. The woman, whose grandparents bore witness to the last Tidecaller exchange, explained that there was no moonstone. The aspect of the moon was the only being who could conjure a moonstone, but she had fled Targon. Nami was unwilling to accept this. She vowed to find the aspect and retrieve the moonstone. The lives of her people depended on it. Is the only all of the world of the seeds of the movies. Nocturne, the eternal nightmare. While all magic can be dangerous and unpredictable, there are some forms or disciplines that even the most skilled mages and sorcerers will shun, and with good reason. For centuries, the practice of shadow magic was all but forbidden across Runeterra. for fear of reawakening the horrors it once unleashed upon the world. The greatest of those horrors has a name, and its name is Nocturne. Towards. Although no record names the first of them to cast off their flesh and enter the spirit realm, it is known that they came to stalk one another not only on the battlefield, but in landscapes shaped by their own subconscious thoughts and emotions. Unconstrained by the laws of physical reality, they fought in ways that more mundane minds could scarcely comprehend, even conjuring subtle, etheric assassins to do their bidding. Shadow mages seemed particularly skilled at such things, and so it was, for a time, that they came to dominate the spirit realm, casting it into twilight. The thoughts of mortals everywhere were touched by this darkness. It sapped their morale and infected their dreams, with nameless fears hounding them day and night, driving some to commit ever more horrendous acts against their own kin. No one can say for certain whether all this suffering created Nocturne from nothing, or if it nearly corrupted a lesser assassin construct into something more willful and deadly. But the shadowy creature that resulted was one of insubstantial form and fathomless dread. Nocturne understood nothing of kindness, honor, or nobility. It was terror made manifest, with none of the restraint necessary to control itself. This demonic creature howled within the spirit realm and set upon those foolish, errant mages who had given it life, thrashing in desperation for an end to its own suffering. It was in pain, and that pain made it cruel, but it quickly acquired a taste for mortal fear. Time has little meaning in that other place, but Nocturne dragged out each and every pursuit for as long as possible, savoring the prey's anguish before cutting their life's silvery thread in instant. Soon enough, there were none left who dared to enter Nocturne's domain. Would the outcome of the Rune Wars have been different if the demon had not played its part beyond the veil? It is difficult to say for certain, but afterwards, what little remained of the lore of shadow magic was hidden away, and its practice carried the sentence of death in many lands. Trapped in the spirit realm, and with precious few intruders to sustain it, Nocturne began to starve. The only thing close to the delectable feasts of fear it had once tasted was when mortal minds unknowingly drifted through the ether in the hours of sleep. Drawn on currents of magic to where the two realms divide, and where peaceful dreams can easily become night terrors, Nocturne found a way to manifest itself into the waking world. Existing now as a shade, eyes burning with cold light, Nocturne has become a sinister reflection of the most primal fears of the many peoples of Runeterra. From the bustling cities to the desolate plains, from the mightiest king to the lowliest peasant, the demon is drawn to any weakness of spirit it can twist into mortal terror and everlasting darkness. Ryze, the Rune Mage. Ryze was just a young apprentice when he first learned of the Akarn powers that had shaped the world. His master, a sorcerer named Tyrus of Helia, was a member of an ancient order whose mission had been to gather and protect the most dangerous artifacts in Runeterra. Ryze overheard Tyrus speaking in hushed tones with another mage, discussing something called world runes. When Tyrus noticed his apprentice, he abruptly ended the conversation, tightly clutching the scroll that never left his side. In spite of the Order's best efforts, knowledge of the runes began to spread. Few could even begin to understand their importance, or the sheer power held within them, and yet all saw them as weapons that could be turned against their rivals. Ryze and Tyrus traveled between the various peoples of Valoran, trying to quell paranoia and encourage restraint. But over time, their missions became increasingly precarious, and Ryze could sense his master's growing desperation. Finally, in the Noxii territories where Ryze was born, the first cataclysmic blow was struck in what would eventually be known as the Rune War. A rune war, and he was a medium god, a medium lover. Two nations were pitted against one another, and tensions were running high. Tyrus pleaded with their leaders in parley at the village of Cone, but he saw this conflict had already escalated beyond his ability to mediate,
Fleeing into the hills, he and Ryze bore horrified witness to the destructive power of the world runes firsthand. The earth fell away beneath them, the bedrock itself seeming to retch and squeal, while the sky above them recoiled as if mortally wounded. They looked back upon the valley where the rival armies had stood, and beheld insanity destruction on a scale so massive that it defied all physical sense. The buildings, the people, all were gone, and the ocean, once a day's journey to the east, now rushed to meet them. Ryze fell to his knees and stared into the great hole torn in the world. Nothing remained, and caught nowhere than nothing left. Open warfare soon raged across Runeterra. Ryze felt compelled to join the conflict, to pick a side and lend his magical strength to the cause. But Tyrus stayed his hand. The two of them had to guide others back toward peace, and pray there was anything left of the world by the time it was all over. Wherever they met those who held the world runes, Tyrus pleaded for restraint. Many was of was, and of a many. Ut as might 100 arm, and run by Ut as might 100 arm. Please, assistant. As time passed and the conflict spread, Ryze noticed his master growing more distant. While Tyrus attended clandestine meetings with great leaders and archmages, he sent his apprentice on errands that seemed of little importance, often for many weeks at a time. Eventually, Ryze decided to confront him, and to his horror, discovered that Tyrus of Helia had secretly come into possession of not one rune, but two. Bitter and angry, the older mage insisted that common mortals were like reckless children, toying with powers they did not understand. He would no longer play diplomat to ignorant powermongers. He had to stop them. Ryze tried to rise us through Men Tyre and 102-1. His for Tyre had nutted. The rises were not possible to pass on, and we can't rise with the winds, but we can't. Where once he desired only peace, now he had the means to bring about the end of all things. Ryze had to act, even if it meant destroying his only true friend and ally in the world. In an instant, he unleashed all the magic he could muster. A moment later, Tyrus's corpse lay smoldering on the floor. Ryze trembled as his mind struggled to process what he had done. If these deadly artifacts could corrupt a mage with the strength and integrity of Tyrus, how was Ryze to handle them? At the same time, he knew he could not entrust them to any other living soul. Soon, the greatest civilizations all but destroyed one another, ending the war. Ryze now understood the task he had inherited. As long as any world rune remained unsecured, Runeterra was surely doomed. This knowledge was to become a lonely burden indeed, for ever since that day he has scoured the world in search of the last remaining runes. He continues to reject the promise of power within each one, choosing instead to bind them in secret locations, far from prying and greedy eyes. Even with his life abnormally prolonged by the magic he is exposed to, Ryze cannot afford to rest, for rumors of the world runes have begun to emerge once more, and the peoples of Runeterra seem to have forgotten the price of wielding them. Senna, the Redeemer. Senna's journey to become a sentinel of light started with darkness. It started with the Black Mist. Senna first encountered the mist at an early age, when wreckage from a distant harrowing washed onto the shores of her home island. The Black Mist within the wreckage awakened upon contact with life. She and her village survived the ensuing storm of souls, thanks to the intervention of a nearby sentinel. But in the wake of the attack, the mist was still mysteriously drawn to Senna. She was cursed, marked by the mist so its horrors pursued her endlessly, the darkness drawn to her like dying moth to living flame. She could never know when it would strike next, but worse was when it didn't come, and Senna had to imagine what awaited in every shadow. The sentinel who saved Senna, a brusque veteran named Urias, did not understand why the mist was drawn to a solitary girl, but he knew if she was going to survive, she had to learn to fight back. And so, Senna joined Urias in the Sentinels of Light, a sacred order that could be traced back to the Blessed Isles.
where the black mist originated. She proved to be a deadly enemy of darkness, mastering the relic stone pistol Urias gave her, learning to channel her soul into light. Yet even as Senna grew comfortable working with Urias, relying on him for gruff guidance, she learned to keep others at gun's length. If she allowed them to get too close, they would only be hurt when the mist came again. Senna could never stay in one place for long, something she and Urias learned when those who offered them shelter inevitably found themselves under siege. After even Urias was slain, Senna wasn't sure if she could let anyone get close again. Reluctantly, Senna sought out Urias' family in Demacia to tell them of his fate. There, she met his son, Lucian, who would not relent until Senna allowed him to join Urias' parting vigil. From the very first moment, she found herself flustered, wondering if her walls were enough to keep out someone so stubborn, full of humor and love. It became clear over time that Lucian's place was with the Sentinels, as Senna's partner, and Senna as his. The more they served together, the deeper their bond became, and Senna realized that the value of her walls wasn't what she kept out, but who she let in. Yet, as Lucian's love for Senna grew, so did his desire to save her from her curse. In time, it became his only focus, the light in his eyes passing into his gun-making, Senna wary that Lucian would only see sorrow where there was love. It was while researching a cure that Senna and Lucian came into conflict with the sadistic wraith Thresh. So close to answering mysteries about the ruination and Senna's curse, Lucian refused to turn back. Thresh's chains whipped towards Senna as she stood between the wraith and her husband. More painful than the scythe was seeing the look of anguish on Lucian's face. With her last breath, Senna screamed for Lucian to run. But as Senna felt the death blow and knew she had lost, she realized there was a glimmer of hope. Her whole life, the mist had haunted her. She didn't need to fear it anymore. She could ride it into the darkness of Thresh's lantern and see what was inside. Her curse had become her only chance for salvation. While Lucian spent years seeking to grant his beloved peace, Senna explored her spectral prison. She learned that life had been the origin of her curse. Its spark shone brighter within her than in anyone else. She'd been infected with it when she first encountered the wreckage that brought the harrowing. There, she'd been touched by a powerful, lingering soul, given its unnatural life. It was life that the Black Mist could never let go. She could use this force to pull the mist into herself, empowering her to sever its hold over others in the Lantern. Among the souls she freed were Sentinels who possessed lost knowledge of the Ruination's origins, of her curse, and the love that created. When Lucian drove his broken pistol into the Lantern, intending to end the torture of the souls within, Senna was waiting. She escaped, shrouded in mist she'd drawn from other souls. She was dead, but also alive, thanks to her curse, wielding a relic stone cannon that could channel darkness along with light, forged from the weapons of fallen Sentinels. No longer running from the mist, Senna now understands the suffering of the souls within. Though it is painful, she draws their mist into herself, liberating them and blasting darkness with darkness. Embracing her death every time she transforms into a wraith, she becomes like those she fought, only to be reborn again, thanks to the life infecting her. Though Senna and Lucian's love survived even death, now they face the consequences of her rebirth. Senna knows what they have to do next, a secret gleaned within the Lantern. Find the ruined king and stop him at any cost. Shaco. The Demon Jester. Most of waters are with Firstius isn't unless his first is sacking to our Valwater? The figure that has come to be known as the Demon Jester is an enigma. No one fully agrees from whence he came, and Shaco never offers any details on his own. A popular belief is that Shaco is not of Runeterra.
that he is a thing from a dark and twisted world. Still others believe that he is the demonic manifestation of humanity's dark urges and therefore cannot be reasoned with. The most plausible belief is that Shaco is an assassin for hire, left to his own lunatic devices until his services are needed. Shaco certainly has proven himself to be a cunning individual, evading authorities at every turn who might seek him for questioning for some horrendous, law-breaking atrocity. While such scuttlebutt might reassure the native inhabitants of Valoron, it seems unimaginable that such a malevolent figure is allowed to remain at large. Whatever the truth of his history might be, Shaco is a terrifying, elusive figure most often seen where madness can openly reign. Smolder, the fiery fledgling. Long before the lands that would become Camivore were named, dragons dwelt there. Once mortals arrived, conflict followed. The strife was only quelled when the first king of Camivore humbled himself before the dragon matriarch, bending the knee and pleading with her to lend her great strength to his armies and all his dreams of empire. So it was that the dragon who would eventually be known as Grandmother Viper and the Camivoran ruler swore the oath of Vol Visperi Decenvine, binding their lineages for generations to come. The dragons remained fiercely loyal to the throne and to those high houses that passed the trials and performed the sacred rites of the oath. In exchange, the dragons were kept satiated with livestock and showered with offerings. The gold, jewels, and precious artifacts they accumulated over the years garnered them a great respect, and those brazen enough to cross the dragons would pause at the thought of their own fortunes being reduced to molten slag and windblown ash. Long after Grandmother Viper passed into legend and her brood was already much diminished, the young King Viego, Santiarol, Moloch Vol Kalahire called upon the Imperio dragons to accompany him and the knightly orders to the Blessed Isles. The dragons refused, seeming to recognize his madness for what it was, though even remaining in Camivore with all their treasures could not spare the kingdom from the tragic repercussions of the ruination. The handful that survived bore witness to endless neglect and conflict, roosting within the deteriorating palace where no monarch would ever reign again. Centuries would pass before another imperial dragon would hatch. That hatchling grew, scarcity of game forced his mother to venture further and further to hunt. This left the nest vulnerable to far-roaming Noxian beastmasters who stole the young dragon and set sail for home to collect their reward. However, shortly before arriving at their destination, the mother dragon discovered the ship's whereabouts and obliterated it with her fiery breath. In the chaos, the hatchling was swept away, borne by the current to a nearby island off mainland Noxus. Scared, alone, and hungry, the hatchling employed his mother's lessons to hunt small prey in this strange environment, and on one such hunt, he stumbled across a human child called Marinos. The boy would go on to name his new friend Smolder, and as the young dragon's ability to communicate grew, their friendship flourished, but remained a secret. The boy feared that if anyone else were to discover Smolder, he'd be taken to the mainland and sold to the highest bidder. As time passed, the boy grew into a man, one with responsibilities that seldom allowed for the playtime Smolder had grown so fond of. And so, in an effort to amuse himself, Smolder decided he'd learn to breathe fire, like the dragons in Marino's stories. After many attempts, instead of sneezing sparks as he'd done countless times before, flames burst forth. And in his excitement over this new development, Smolder failed to notice the fire spreading until it had engulfed the forest canopy. Suddenly, louder than a hunting horn, louder than thunder, a roar unlike any other rang through the air as a massive dragon approached. Having been drawn by the rising smoke, Smolder's mother swept down to embrace her child lovingly, as if they never parted. carried away from the growing inferno by the scruff of his Smolder sword, his first time experiencing the world as dragons should. Smolder now roosts with his mother on the cliffside, where she'd spent so long watching and waiting for signs he yet lived. Every night, she recounts the history of his kin, the meaning and responsibilities of imperial dragons, and how to hone his fledgling abilities. And one day, when he is ready, they will return together to their ancestral home to usher in a new golden age for Camivore. Tahm Kench, the River King. The waterways of Valoran are old, but far older still is the demon Tahm Kench. From muddy gambling tents along the Serpentine River, through the salt-crusted dice halls of Billwater, to the gilded wagering tables of Piltover and Zon, all those who have given a covetous glance to another's wealth know the unending hunger that comes from an encounter with the River King. The first tales of the creature were told by a traveling people who plied the Serpentine. They warned of a giant fish with a cavernous mouth, who would lure in the disadasted with the promise of more. One such story was that of a young man renowned for his honesty. Though born to the ways of a raftsman, he desired a life beyond the poor banks he knew so well, and the River King promised him an unforgettable experience if only he would tell one little lie. It seemed harmless enough, so the raftsman bent the truth in conversation with his own brother. That night, the demon appeared, revealing a fork in the river the raftsman had never noticed before. He followed it to a camp of foreign folk who offered him food and drink and fresh companionship. As dawn neared and the raftsman was full and ready to return to his people, the demon appeared again, promising an even greater experience for another lie. His interest had piqued. The man accepted the bargain, telling falsehoods to his hosts. But when the river finally emptied into the sea, he found himself alone and lost. There was no one left to lie to. So many dark choices, all of them his own, had left the raftsman with no way back home. The brilliant Roth Playgrin, hardy Astrophetic, the long day of the river, and water became. The river beyond, and the one could survive the river, there. All of the sea became full. In Billwater, fortunes are boom or bust, with as much wealth going out with the tide as comes in. Many a tavern yarn tells of old Tom, a demon of the water, with an unending appetite for games of chance, such that the loquacious beast became a symbol for many of the city's gambling dens and houses of sin. Once the Sun Gates opened easy trade from Billwatcher to Piltover, tales of Tahm Kench became more common in the City of Progress and its underbelly, Zon. There, group of children has the mysterious village has China was the attention's attention. Children night to know more, story behind, pictures told tell us. It is said he came one progress day to a struggling Piltovan inventor and offered her an idea certain to make a wealthy clan take notice. All he asked in return was a single lock of her hair. The one her corp and Danvent 111 require user. Not 2-2 havening, 2-1 was and 2 coat gold stride too. The demon came again, offering a deal that would take the tip of one finger. The following week it was an ear. A year passed, and by then there was little left of the woman to give. Finally she called 2 coats herself, begging him to make it all stop. He laughed as he opened his jaws wide, telling her he would protect her from herself, and promptly swallowed her whole. The River King, the Great Waddler, Old Yawnbelly, 2 Coats. The demon Tahm Kench is known by many names, but all who speak them had learned a singular truth. No matter how alluring his words may be, in his mouth, you will be lost. Zilean. The Chrono Keeper, Icathia, most desolate and cursed of lands, was not always so. Theirs was a rich and diverse civilization, ruled by benevolent Axamuk, last of the mage kings of old. As the Sherman Empire expanded across the continent, Axamuk's calls for peaceful coexistence were ignored, and his armies destroyed by the god warriors of the Ascended Host. Though humbled by this defeat, Money Icathians saw an opportunity for mutual advancement. Accepting an offer of autonomous satrapy, they installed a governing council of distinguished mages, philosophers, and lawmakers to oversee the transition of power. After almost 9 centuries of imperial rule, a young man named Zilean joined the council's ranks. He was an elemental mage with a prodigious understanding of physical reality, who had studied under the greatest minds of the age, from the great Yun of Ixtal to the astromancers of Faraj, and countless others besides. There was one component of the material realm that few had ever truly grasped, but Zilean was determined to master: time. Time was the one inescapable constant in all things. Even the mighty god warriors were not immune to its passage, though they were revered above all others in Shuriman culture. As part of the political establishment, Zilean now saw more clearly the smoldering discontent among the citizens of Icathia. While their land was home to some of the most heroic leaders and revolutionary thinkers in the Empire, not one had ever been deemed worthy of ascension. Again and again, the council submitted petitions to the distant emperor, yet access to the sun disk was denied, without explanation. For all they gave, it seemed Icathians would never be seen as equals. Zilean's own resentment grew, yet he was worried by open talk of secession among his peers. He was a patriot through and through, but in the face of the Ascended Host, any rebellion could only end in calamity for his people. Seeking a diplomatic solution, he went as an envoy to neighboring Kalek, Kalduga, and Ixtal. He had made many allies in his lifetime, and he implored them to stand with Icathia. Each time, the answer was the same: they would not defy Shurima. If Zilean's people wanted to, they would do so alone. Returning home, he was shocked to find the council had decided to crown a new mage king. Breathlessly, joyously, they told Zilean of the ancient and forbidden power they had discovered, a power so great it would all but guarantee Icathia's victory. They told Zilean of the power of the Void. He looked to these reasoned, wise Icavians, but saw only madness in their eyes. As much as it grieved him, Zilean would rather his homeland's revolution be crushed than to let this abomination be set loose. Zilean's worst fears proved true. Once unleashed in battle, the Void overwhelmed the mages attempting to control it, and Icadia was doomed. As he tried to escape the capital, the ground shook, buildings toppled. Such horrors as had no place in this world or the next erupted from the depths, driving terrified citizens before them. They were trapped. Hundreds of thousands of innocents would die. In desperation, Zilean urged as many as he could to take refuge in his tower, and did the impossible. He removed the entire structure from time. Crashing to the cold floor, his power spent, Zilean looked at the frozen figures all around him. The Void was halted, but only within those walls. Outside, where Icathia once stood, there was nothing. Zilean had spent decades trying to comprehend the mysteries of time and causality, and it seemed only he could move freely back and forth within the anomaly he had somehow created. These people had been saved, true enough. He just didn't know how to undo what he had done to achieve it. Through deep meditations and esoteric devices of his own design, he began to divine the strands of past and present that led to this moment, gradually learning how to move back and forth along them, looking for a future where his efforts had already succeeded. It was there that he found the true threat, the end of everything, the great unmaking that awaits Runeterra. Effectively, Zilean now exists everywhere, and always has. Even so, he is only too aware of the consequences of trying to bring about change in the world and sparking other unexpected destinies, often conflicting and almost always more dangerous. Perhaps if he can find a way to save his own people, and the greater disaster might also be averted. The only question is, what might he be willing to sacrifice along the way?